Hello and welcome to Unapologetically Technical. This is the show that's different. My name is Jesse Anderson, and with me today is Paige Roberts. She is an author, presenter, and data nerd, and she's independent. By the time you see this, she might have a job, but you never know. You might see this and say, I need that person. Paige, welcome to the show. Would you mind introducing yourself a bit more?
Sure. Hi, Paige Roberts. I have been in this industry for almost 30 years, I think 28, maybe 29. And I have been in data management and analytics, AI, that whole space the whole time, but I've done like a dozen different jobs while I've been doing that. It's like I've never done the same thing for longer than 4 or 5 years. I think I have a deep-seated problem figuring out what I want to be when I grow up. But I really enjoy data nerd is I put that in the title for a good reason, because I think this is what I geek out about, and so that has taken me on a lot of different paths and over the years. So.
You know, that actually gives me a good idea for a new show. It's going to be called "What Do You Want to Be When You Grow Up?" Because in many ways, that's what this show is about. It's basically taking somebody's career all the way through and then talking about technology. And some people haven't decided for certain. You all revolve data, but you haven't decided what you're going to do. And to that end, you're what I call a mini paths person, where you've taken a lot of different paths. You've, as you mentioned, every 5 years, you decided to do something new. Did you make these choices very coherently? Was it more organic? How was that?
It was very organic, and a lot of the changes were made for different reasons. Like I was managing a marketing team and loving that, and then someone offered me double the money to go and build data pipelines, and I was just kind of like, sorry guys, I can't turn that down. I got a family. You know, so it's kind of and other times it was like I think my family has had a lot to do with it. I was just thinking about the fact I was working as a consultant for Pervasive and traveling all over, solving people's problems, teaching them how to use the software, building data pipelines for them or whatever. And my kids are my husband's children by a previous marriage, and his ex-wife was killed in a car wreck. So I was trying to go through the adoption process and all of that, and I'm in like freaking Portland. It's like, this is, I'm in North Carolina next week. It's like I can't be there for the kids and continue to travel and do consulting. So no matter how much I liked it, I had to go find me a job that I can work from home. And so that a lot of times that's what it is. It's like just life situation at the time. It makes sense to switch. So that's a lot of the switches. And every now and then I just kind of, it's like I'm doing the same thing. I'm a little bored of it. And somebody, hits me at the right moment and says, hey, we could use somebody to do this, but you have to learn this new cool technology. Like back when Hadoop was brand new, it's like, hey, go over here and we'll put a Hadoop cluster on your desk and let you play with it. I was like, okay. Like, you got me. So yeah, that's kind of my I'm like I said, I geek out a little bit about data. So when people offer me the opportunity to learn a new tech, it's kind of hard for me to say no.
Sometimes people ask what it takes to get into tech, or sometimes they say, how do I get into data? And what I find most pervasive is this love of data. Maybe they don't have a Hadoop cluster on there, or maybe they just love doing something on a spreadsheet and that gradually grows. But part of what I see that concerns me is the community is growing around people saying money equals this is what I want to do, rather than I think it really has to come from this base of I love data in some fashion. Maybe it's I love technology in some fashion, and I want to apply something to it.
I want to play with it. I want to tell people about it. I want to, have some say in how it progresses in the future and things like that. Did you wanna like go through like my from the beginning kind of thing? How did I start out?
Yes, all the way from the beginning. So you started as a tech writer and a tech support person in web dev, which is oddly
Before
enough
that,
how I started. Oh,
oh,
yeah,
that's funny. No,
yeah.
before that, I actually I got a science degree, biology, and then I got a degree in communication sciences, and I was working on my master's in deafness studies. And I quit one class and a thesis away from finishing. The reason was I had been working for 6 years at that point at the School for the Deaf, the Texas School for the Deaf. That's where I live. And while I loved teaching, and my last year in particular was awesome because I got to teach beginning programming and desktop publishing and stuff like that. I did not love a lot of the administration and the red tape. Oh my God, the red tape. It was so much red tape. And I just, I was like, okay, I want to do something different. that was one of those, I want to change what I want to be when I grow up. But I've always loved writing, and trying to be a fiction writer and make a living is very hard. So I was like, tech writers can make a living. So I went to this little tiny startup. I was employee 20 at Data Junction Corporation. And I was like, I am a good writer and I like technology. So if you've got something you want me to learn, I can do that. And the head of the tech services department, which was like 4 people, I think, was like, here's our software, play with it. And I did that. And she's like, okay, now use it to build a data pipeline. Here's some data. I'm like, okay, this is pretty easy software. And she's like, you're hired. And the very first day, they handed me a manual. I mean, back when there were, paper, actual printed manuals and a red pen, and said, here, edit this. And so I read it my first day. I read it. I edited it. This is, I'm done. Okay. This is not too bad. We can turn this into something clean real fast. And then she's like, now you've read the manual, you know more than most of the people calling us for tech support. So get on the phones and do tech support half time and write our documentation the other half. And I wasn't there more than a year and a half when our web developer quit. And they were like, we had nobody who knew how to do that in-house. And they were like, does anybody want to learn? I'm like, sure. So I learned, HTML and CSS and PHP and JavaScript and all that, and was just running the website for a while. While I was doing backline tech support, while I was teaching people how to use the software that I had, while I was in design meetings so that I could help guide the software, while I was doing QA on the software. It's like, this is the wonderful thing about startups. You don't wear a hat, you wear like 4, and you just switch. You never end up getting bored, I think, because you're doing something different like every day. It's like whatever needs doing, that's what you do. And I learned a lot during those first 3 years because I was doing so many different things.
So when you were teaching programming, you knew the basics of programming, or not even the basics, you know how to teach it. Okay.
No, what happened is like I said, I went to school to teach biology, to teach science to deaf kids, maybe to teach English because, so English and science were my 2 things. And when they gave me this class because the guy worked for a week and then quit and went somewhere else. And they were like, now what do we do? So I ended up teaching this class, and the desktop publishing and all the other parts I could do in my sleep. But the beginning programming part, I did not know. Someone else had already created this self-guided curriculum for that class. And what I did was I took the curriculum home and I did the course. So I tried to stay at least 3 months ahead of my students. So I would do 3 lessons and then go back and teach one, and then do a couple more lessons and try to say at least 3 or 4 lessons. And I got to see, some of those kids were bright. It was really hard to stay ahead of them. But it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot. And the classroom was, it's the computers. So there's computers, but it was divided in half, and our IT person for the school had the other half. So whenever I had trouble with, with any technology, or I had trouble with, a concept or something like that, there was an IT person right next to me, that I could just go, hey, I don't know anything about this. How does this work? And then I did, and then I knew. Of course, we're talking about, 80s, 90s technology. So, I mean, she spent a fair amount of her time washing the mouse balls. Do you remember mouses used to have balls? And then we get really dirty because, kids. And it was very interesting introduction to how to do programming. But that was my introduction to how to do programming, was me learning how to do it and then teaching the same, just as fast as I could do it.
It's not the first time I've heard a story like that. I'm glad you made it through. So you actually were able to parlay that into a software engineering job, which is what you did for Pervasive. Your very next job, you had the title software engineering.
Yeah, so Pervasive bought Data Junction. This is what happens with startups. And I had a very low salary, which ironically was still more than I was making as a teacher. But they gave me a lot of stock options as I went along. Kind of made, it's like, wow, you did a good job. Here, have some stock options, and they were barely worth as much as the paper they were printed on. But then Pervasive came along and bought the startup, and all of a sudden they were worth money. And I bought a new car and bought everybody in my family new computers, and that was great. I actually had gone over to programming just before that. So the president of Data Junction, Mike Hoskins, was looking for a newbie programmer, a baby programmer. So someone right out of college, or who didn't know our products but knew programming, or me, who knew our products but didn't know programming that well. And I had taught myself, like I said, all those web-related languages, and I went back and learned Perl and Visual Basic and 2 or 3 other languages online. Do you know ZDNet used to be nothing but classes online? This was the early days when you can learn something online, but you could, and I thought it was great, so I did. And I think later I took a class in college, a college extension course in Java, but that was kind of it. It's like I had self-taught myself 3 or 4 languages, and they needed somebody, and I knew the products backwards, forwards, and upside down. And I had helped design them and QA them and teach people how to use them. Done backline tech support on them for years at that point. So they were like, let's try out somebody who knows our stuff. And I ended up, so I'm a tech support person, and I'm getting on the unstructured data extractor. That was kind of my baby. People would call me and I would report a bug. It's like, okay, here's a bug, here's your reproduction steps. And then 6 months later, I'm a programmer on the same application, and I'm fixing the bugs that I reported. It was a little strange, but I was like, I'm glad I do good reproduction instructions because now I have to do it.
That's karma. That's karma.
It is karma. It is karma. And that worked out really well. I really enjoyed myself. I was doing all the programming for that. It was they used to call me the Cambio Queen. So the application was called Cambio. And back when I was doing support for it in QA and design and all that, that's when I got the Cambio Queen title. But then I ended up as the programmer for that application. And that was only half my time. The other half of the time was building installers for all of the applications for the company, which was 3 when I started. It was 17 5 years later, after I'd been doing it for a while. So when I started, there were 3 different code bases. And I had to make, if anybody wanted to change, I had to make it in 3 different places. And I was like, this is terrible, especially when it went to 4 and 5. I was like, I can see the writing on the wall. This is not going to work. So I had consolidated all the code bases into 1 and then set it up so it was modular and had like a text file. You could just go, include this, don't include that. and change the name of stuff. It was great for OEMing. So that was fun. I did that. And then the company went through a phase of outsourcing. Do you remember when that was cool? that was the thing. Dell did it, so we had to do it. Yeah, Pervasive did it, and they basically laid off a lot of really good programmers, experienced guys, and got these kids right out of college in India to try and do what they had been doing. And it was just not really fair to anybody, I don't think. But that was when my husband's ex-wife died. And on bereavement leave, they called me to tell me that they had given my job to some kid in India. And I was laid off. And they were like, well, if you stay for another 6 months and train your replacement, then, we'll pay you a bonus or something. And I was like, I got, all of a sudden I'm full-time parent. It's like, I got all kinds of stuff going on. I can't go look for a job right now. So, okay, I'll train my replacement. And they sent this kid right out of college, and they told him he was going to do all of this. They had wanted me to rewrite everything I'd done in the last 5 years in a new technology. And I told them, it was like, that's going to take a year or two to do by myself. Give me a team of 1 or 2 other people, and I could probably get it done in 6 months. And the head of that department at the time had not touched that code in many years and thought it was very simple, and was like, oh, that's ridiculous. So I taught this poor kid, and he came in, and I was like, they want you to redo this in 6 months. And he just looked at me like, you got to be freaking kidding me. That's a 2-year job. And I was like, yes, it is. Good luck. I'm out of here. So I actually ended up doing consulting then. That was when I went off, and I was doing consulting for the same company. I just changed departments. And I went off and was building pipelines and teaching people how to use software and everything. And this poor kid, I think he was 23, and he had a pregnant wife at home and all this other stuff. And they ended up giving him a team of a couple more people, and they still were struggling with it. And so I came back to the company 3-4 years later, and they were still using my code. I was just kind of like, I told you. But sometimes, people have to get their hands dirty and get into it before they figure out the issues.
I see a pattern of karma to your career.
It is, but I think if as long as the karma is good, as long as you're doing the best you can, and even when you're not in a situation you like, keep doing the best you can, and looking for something different has been my philosophy forever. Like if you're not happy where you're at, you keep doing your job, and you look for another one.
There you go. Sage words. So from there you went and you started becoming a data integration specialist for Actian Solutions.
Yeah, that was when I was doing consulting, and I was trying to adopt my husband's kids after their mom was dead, and we were going through the adoption hearings and everything, and I was like traveling to do consulting all over the country, and I was like, I can't, be a mom to traumatized kids and go through adoption hearings and all of this other stuff when I'm off, 1,000 miles away. It's just not going to work. So what I looked for was a work from home gig. So I did competitive migrations and automated some stuff for these guys for a couple of years. And that meant I could be at home when my kids needed me. And that really was a big help, I think.
Do you think it's different for women in that sense? Or what do you think that is?
No, I don't think so. Well, let me rephrase that. For most people, yes, absolutely it is different for women. For me and my husband, not so much. We have always been very good about co-parenting and taking on the responsibilities depending on the situation. He had a job at Dell doing tech support for several years, and he kept that job even though he hated it. The last 3 or 4 years were kind of awful. But he kept it because it gave him the ability to, he had like 2 months of PTO built up. and he could take the kids to doctor appointments, and if they were homesick, he could go and be with them, while I had to work. I couldn't do that. And then when I got the job where I could work from home, he then got a job outside the home because he could. At that point, I could be home to take care of the kids, and he could go get something else. And then after that job, I ended up doing something, and he came back and did some work from home. So we've pretty much traded off a lot. At some point, Joe puts it like this: it's like his career went, well, and mine went, wah. And he was like, you know what? I can stay home. I can take care of the kids. I can take care of the house. And he's a maker. I can build things. I can build his decks. I can, all that kind of stuff. And so he stayed home, and I've been working for a lot of years. So we have kind of the reverse of what a lot of people consider a traditional thing. But his parents also have 40 acres in the middle of nowhere, which is, oh my God, beautiful. And he's an only child, and they were in their 70s. And so we moved out. I now live out in the middle of nowhere on 40 acres of beautiful land, with a couple of horses and an amazing garden and all that. And his job is take care of 40 acres and his parents. Build decks, build porches. I mean, we plopped a little manufactured house plunk in the middle of a cow pasture. And he's spent a lot of time, building fences and sidewalks and driveways and carports and all the things that you kind of take for granted if you live in the city, that you would have that. We didn't have that until he built it. So that's what he does, is he builds things.
Of the guests on the show, I think I've met a few spouses, and I have met Joe, and he's a great guy. I did enjoy my time with Joe. He came to Day Texas and hung around with us. In fact, I think you brought him to a few other conferences, haven't you?
Yeah, he goes to Day with me a lot, because it's in Austin, and we lived in Austin. He was born there. We lived in Austin for 20 years, 15, something like that. He lived there. Like I said, he was born there. I lived in Austin 15 or 20 years. And so we have a lot of friends there, and my brother still lives there and things like that. So going to Austin is a little bit like coming home. I get to visit everybody. Joe gets to visit everybody. He knows a lot of the folks at the conference. Lynn Bender, who runs that conference, used to work with me at Data Junction. This past year, his two main helpers were my brother Keith and my old boss Shane. So yeah, it's like I know like all those people, and Joe knows all those people, and yeah, so it's the one that's fun for him. He has come with me to a couple of conferences, but he usually doesn't have that much fun because I'm working. I don't get to, we're in San Jose. Yay. Yeah, go off and do something in San Jose by yourself because I'm busy being at Strata. That's just the way it kind of works. And that one I mentioned because he did go with me. He was one of the people at Tech Shop, and he loved Tech Shop. It's kind of like it's like a gym membership only with tools. So for a maker, it's like heaven. He loved that place. And he worked there for a little while. He was a paid member for a long time. So yeah. Maker, tinkerer, adventurer is what he puts on his business cards these days.
Business cards. I love that. So you moved into data. So you're doing data integration. What prompted that move into data at that point?
It was not at that point. Data Junction, where I started in the 90s, was basically a data pipeline software. It was ETL. And the Cambio that I worked on a lot was unstructured data extraction tool. And then we had an engine that you could plug in underneath to do to automate data pipelines. This is back in the 90s, but I mean that was what we did. And Informatica was probably our biggest competitor. And then I think Pervasive, expanded. When they bought us, they had what they call Zen now, Actian Zen, a little embeddable database that was embedded in like everybody's software. And if they weren't using Access. And that plus, the data integration was a powerful story. And we were able to, I went out frequently and as a consultant and just was like, oh, you have this problem? I can fix that. And a week later, boom, they'd have it all, here's your data architecture, here's your pipelines, it's all automated. If you need to make a change, here's where you do that, see ya. That was what I did. And it was lovely software. I think one of my first jobs in tech support was people would lose their copybooks with COBOL. So we're talking mainframe, COBOL, really. And I would get in there, and they had a Data Junction had a visual parser where you could pull up the data and see it in hex code and figure out how to find the record length and where your fields were, and is this one packed decimal, or what's the field type, data type, and stuff like that. So that was my early days. I did that. So I was in data since the 90s. It was really not so much a switch as a look at it from a different aspect. Over the years, we went from ETL to ELT, and now I think we're back to ETL. And I kind of have that perspective over 30 years. I've seen us make all those switches from different perspectives, but but that's what I've been seeing. So yeah, where was I next? What was my? You have it in front of you. I don't.
I have it in front of me. So you went from there. You went back to Pervasive.
I did.
You held various jobs. You were content developer, a marketing manager, senior programmer analyst, technology adoption manager, and then big data division.
So the technology, the analyst thing was, I actually worked for CSC for a little while, Computer Sciences Corporation. It's a giant, or it used to be anyway, a giant consulting firm. And so here's what happened. So the guys at Pervasive that I used to work with called me. And at that point, I'd been working from home for 2 years. And they were like, come back. We need somebody with your skills and to do marketing. And I was just like, marketing? What the hell? I've been doing programming and building pipelines and consulting and, software development, software design and stuff. This makes no sense. Why do you want me for marketing? And they said, we have some brilliant technical people. We have some really good writers and marketing people. We do not have anybody who has both those skills. And I think from that point forward, that was almost like my, that was the thing that really guided my career after that, was the fact that I have both those skills, that I am both good at writing and explaining, teaching, presenting, being a communicator, and I love tech. I love to dig into tech. I love to understand new tech, things like that. So I spent probably the rest of my career going back and forth between understanding some new tech and telling everybody why it was cool. That was my job. And the technical content was basically a content marketer. I was writing all the technical, the white papers and the, deep, deep dives of, reference architectures, things like that. And then I became the marketing manager, which was pretty much guy in charge of marketing was like, here, you're good at this, go take, use these people with various skills and just run marketing, do marketing for the whole thing. So I had an SEO guy that worked with me, and my mentor at the time was a brilliant marketer, Lori Witzel. She's still out there doing it. And she taught me about all the things. It's funny because I have had these great mentors. So when I started programming, I knew languages. I knew this beginning programming thing that I had taught. I didn't know about modular code. I didn't know about object-oriented programming. I didn't know about, a whole lot of things that you learn if you get a degree in computer science. And I had two awesome mentors, and they were both women, ironically, because that's unusual in a tech field that they were both women. But the Kim was one of them, and Nikki Duvall, Nikki Peckham, maybe she got married. And they were both amazing. I think Kim is retired now, but Nikki's still out there being like a head of engineering for, you know, another company. And they were my teachers. I remember building that installer for 17 things and trying to figure out how to do it and stuff. And I had built it all in hard coded. I had hard coded everything. And I brought it to Kim, and she was like, you really should have done that modular and easier. And I was like, oh, you're right. I should have done that. That would have been much more sensible. So I went back and redid it. And just having the mentors made the difference for me. And my mentor then to learn marketing. I mean, at that point I knew the tech. My marketing mentor was Lori, and she taught me about crafting a message and knowing your target audience and being concise and, you know, all the things that, you know, as a documentation writer, I didn't need to know that. In fact, as a documentation writer, you want to put every little step in there, because if somebody gets lost even on one step, then they can't go to the next step. So you always want to be super specific for documentation writing, and you want to be super concise for marketing writing. So it's like I had to wrap my head around that, and it was learning a new skill. And that has done me a lot of good over the years too. So that worked out.
It sounds like the mentorship was incredibly important to you.
It was.
What do you think it takes to be a good mentor as well as a good mentee?
Well, the good mentee, I can say, is a willingness to say, I have no idea how this works. Please help. I mean, you know, walking in and saying, you know, to this techie who's been, you know, doing nothing but, you know, tech documentation and consulting and programming and stuff for years, and saying you need to be a marketer now. I didn't have any problem walking in and going, I know nothing about marketing. Teach me. And that was her area, and she could do that. And I think that's the mentee thing, is you have to be willing to learn from somebody else. And you have to be really careful about how you pick, I got to say. Like when I was my first year programming, the company kept growing. So they shoved a new guy in my office with me. Well, this new guy had 10 years experience as a programmer. And this is my first year. I'm still learning. So I was like, I'm writing this code, and it's C-based, and you're a C programmer, so you should be able to look at it and kind of give me some help, because I can't figure out why it's not working. Let me get a second pair of eyes, which a lot of times that's the solution. So he came and he looked at it, he scrolled through it for a little while, and he went, well, you didn't write this code anyway. I was like, what? He was like, this must have been written by your male predecessor, because women can't write code like this. And I was just like, well, there's one person I can't ask for help. Go away. I never want to talk to you again. But, you know, you run into that as a female in the field. I think that was probably the most egregious and in your face. But there's been a lot of times when it's just like, you know, you say something and everybody goes poo-poo. And then, you know, a guy says the exact same thing and they're like, oh, what a good idea. You know, that happens a lot. I think the second most egregious, I was working for Hortonworks at some point, doing a documentation for a big data architecture for E&Y. And there was a problem with scaling tail-end. They were trying to basically integrate a giant Hortonworks cluster and use tail-end for the pipelines. And of course, I know tail-end, I know Hadoop at that point. And I mean, I knew Hive and all, HiveQL and all that stuff. So I had a good concept of it, of what was going on. And they had called in a consultant from tail-end, and he got the concept and all this, and he was driving me crazy because I had some physical difficulties. So I had to sit down a lot of times when everybody else was standing up. So they'd all be standing up in circle around me because the Hortonworks guys were great. They were very, very polite. And he would step in front of me and talk to everybody else. And I was so frustrated. He did that 3 or 4 times, I guess. And I was like, dude, give me a break here. And finally, at some point, he was like, I think I've figured it out. I think I've solved the problem. And I was like, and I'm writing up the solution now. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. Can you send that to me? Because it was my job to kind of communicate to the executives, because I had that geek to mortal translation capability that really helped me a lot. And that was largely my job there, was to to understand all this technical stuff and then communicate it to E&Y executives who knew their job, but they didn't understand ours. And he looked at me and he goes, why would I send it to you? You wouldn't understand it anyway. And I was just like, I was like, dude, you don't know anything about me except that I have boobs. That's all you know. And that is enough for you to decide that I know nothing, even though I'm sitting in this room doing the same, with all these other guys who are all very technical. I was the only girl on that team. We had one other girl leading the Yolanda. She was leading the the front end team, and she's one of the inventors of data flow, by the way. The Cloudera stream processor, and she's brilliant. I knew my stuff, and he just decided anybody with boobs doesn't know what they're doing, and it just yeah. But I mean, the head of that team, to his credit, immediately called Talend and said, your consultant just insulted my people. Get him out of here and either send me somebody competent, or I will go with another technology to do the ETL. And I was just like, whoa, that's some support. And I've gotten that all through my career. I mean, Mike Huskins given me a chance to be a programmer when I didn't have a degree in that. Ron Halverson was the head of marketing, who was like, you're really good at this. Here, why don't you take over the marketing management team and I will, run all the pieces. And I was just like, that was amazing. I mean, I've over the years gotten a really good support, a lot of support from the guys over me. I have bosses that I adore. Tandu is one of them. She's a CTO of Precisely now. She was a SyncSort back then. And Nikki and Kim and all those people that that just really knew what they were doing. But a lot of the guys too, who were in over me and yet encouraged me to do better and more. Jeff Ely is now the director of product marketing at Cloudera. He was my boss at Vertica, and he at some point I said I really like presenting, and he was like, really? You should, in that case, put in to present at every single show you want to go present at. I was like, all of them? Really? He's like, yes, you should do that. And I said, why? What, you got to pay to send me and stuff. And he's like, it's much cheaper than paying for a speaking slot. And you love doing it. I think people who love doing something will do it way better than anybody else. So if you love doing it, go do more of it, please. And I was just like, now that's a boss. That's a good boss.
Yes, they understood it. So from there, you went to SyncSort, where you were the product marketing manager. And I think that was where we originally met.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing about I was the product marketing manager for 2 weeks. It was a lot like that programming class that I taught after the guy left after a week. So the actual product manager for that, it was distributed ETL software. So, he left. a week or two after I got there, and I had talked to him, and I was like, "Oh, you're leaving?" He's like, "Yeah, I've already put in my notice." And I was like, at that point, I'd been there a week or so, and I was like, what's involved in being a product manager? And he described it, and I was like, that sounds a lot like being a product marketing manager. There's not that much difference. And he's like, yeah, it's a pretty similar skill set. And I was like, I could do that job. And he's like, you really could. And he recommended me to Tandu as his replacement. So I ended up doing product management for the ETL software for a year and a half, and at the same time, still doing product marketing for that software, both of which, by the way, are full-time jobs. So that was, yeah, I didn't like sleep a lot. There were no weekends. There was no hobby. My husband, felt like a widow, a widower. And I was just, yeah. So I went to Tandu at some point, and I was like, I got to sleep sometime. I think I'd got to cut it back to only one job. And she was like, that's cool. You're good at both. Which one do you want? And I was like, I get to create more with product marketing. With product management, you sort of figure out what needs to be created, and then you cat herd to try and get the people who don't work for you to create it. And I was like, I prefer to just figure out what needs to be created and then create it. So I was like, this is the job I want going forward. And she was like, okay, train your replacement. So I spent another 6 months still half doing the job while I was doing this other job. And I was doing that for the data integration. The new guy, by the way, that I trained, Ashwin, brilliant. He is now VP of product management at Precisely. Really sharp guy. And then while I was doing that as the product marketing manager for the data integration line and training my replacement for product manager for the data integration line, we absorbed Trillium, which is a data quality line, and the person who was doing product marketing for them left. So now I'm doing it for the data integration line and the data quality line. And then I forgot what the other product line was, but the guy who was doing product marketing for it got sick, like seriously sick, and had to pretty much drop out, long-term disability kind of thing. And I was like, I'm like, okay, wait a minute. I went from doing 2 jobs to doing 1 job to doing 3 to 3. And I'm like, what? This is crazy. So yeah, I worked at SyncSort for more than 3 years, and I'm not sure I slept any of those 3 years. It was pretty nuts.
Sounds like it. So hopefully your next job you got some sleep. It was Actium, where you were a Hadoop analytics evangelist.
I think that was backwards. I think I did that, and then I went to SyncSort. I did that, and then I did a year at Hortonworks, and then I did consulting. I did lots of consulting for other people too, but Hortonworks was my big one. And then I went to SyncSort. Okay. But the reason I was working for, I think, CSC maybe, to build in pipelines for the state of North Carolina, and my old boss. At that time, David Imbar, who had been my marketing department boss, called me up and was like, we really need somebody to come back and do marketing and evangelism for our new big data team. And I was like, ooh, the big data team. You mean the ones that are developing a new engine, that a distributed faster pipeline automation engine, and working with Hadoop, and and I was like, oh, that sounds so cool. I would love to do that. And I was like, but you can't afford me. CSC is paying me really well. And they were like, we can't afford you, but we can give you lots of stock options and a window office and all this other stuff. And they were like, sold. And a 4-node Hadoop cluster on your desk that you get to play with. And, I was just like, okay, I'm coming. So that's how I ended up doing the Hadoop and analytics evangelist for their Center of Excellence. And I got to say, Pervasive had an engine for processing data distributed that was about 10 times faster than Spark, and invented about 5 years before Spark. It was awesome. The problem with it was no matter how much the engineers and everybody else tried to get them to open source it, they wouldn't. So the only people working on it were the engineers at Pervasive and then Actian when Actian bought them. And it just wasn't, it just didn't go broad like Spark did. And back in the day, everybody was using MapReduce, which was slow as Christmas. And Spark was beautiful because it was so much faster. But I kept going, but Data Rush is like even faster than Spark. Why did you use that? And it's like, because it's not open source. And that was the answer. And so that beautiful engine died on the vine, as far as I know. I don't know if it went anywhere. I haven't been keeping up with stuff at Actian, but yeah, that was pretty sad. But I was working with that. Nime was our front end, which is a really cool data mining platform. And a lot of the folks that were on that team are now over at Nime in Austin.
So continuing that theme of open source and the importance of it, you went to Vertica as the open source relations manager.
Yeah, and the other thing was that was right after SyncSort. So when I was like burnt out and like I've been working 3-4 jobs for 3 years and I'm exhausted, I interviewed at Vertica, and the first thing they ask you when you interview is, why are you leaving your old job? And I was like, well, because, I'm working myself into an early grave. That's probably, that's the main reason. And they were like, yeah, no, we don't do that. We believe in work-life balance. That's just not sustainable. And I heard that from 2 different people while I was interviewing. And I was just like, oh, yes, a place that believes in work-life balance. What an amazing concept. And 6 months after I started working there, Joy, who was the head of product, I think, for Vertica, she was head of product management, product marketing, everything product related. And she was like, I went and did a speech in North Carolina, and she lived in Raleigh. And we met up and had coffee and stuff. And I asked her, and she asked me the same question. Why did you leave SyncSort? And I was like, well, I needed to have one job and be able to sleep and have weekends again. And she said, oh, no, that's not sustainable. We don't do that. We believe in work-life balance. Word for word. I was like, well, I know where it came from now. But that was it. It was like they were very much, and it was a very sustainable team. And it was, I loved Vertica. Vertica was a lot of fun to work at. And oh my God, cool tech. Do you know they have AI-driven data modeling? So because they were the first ones to do columnar data. I mean, back when it was cool and unusual. Because they were very focused on analytics, and that whole concept of columnar is just beautiful for analytic queries and stuff. So they did that, but they were the only ones that were doing columnar data. So no one knew how to data model Vertica. So they created a little thing called Database Designer that basically looked at your data, looked at your query load for the last 6 months, year, however long you wanted to do it, and designed you the perfect database for that, and just handed you the DDL. And you could either click a button and it would just create it, or you could, if you were experienced data modeler, you could look at the DDL and go, oh yeah, I see this is, well, I might want to tweak that. Okay, tweak that. And then you could run it, and boom, you have an awesome database. And incrementally over time, you could go back and go, well, my queries are slowed down, but my data has drifted a little bit. My query load is different. Let me run this again. And it would incrementally improve your database design so that your queries all ran faster again. It was just, I mean, that in Pinot, I think, is the only other technology I run into that has that capability. Theirs is a little different, but it was the same idea. It's like, we're so kind of weird and cutting edge that nobody knows how to data model. So we're just going to build that in as an AI. And I'm just like, every database should have that capability. It's like, that is the coolest thing. And I'm like, the fact that they had that and that you could just get into production like you were ready to go within a few days, and you didn't have to hire a expensive data model capability, a person with this really brilliant data modeling skill to get this going. And that's that's ironically the direction a lot of people are going now, is using AI to get them going a lot faster. And Vertica was one of the first to do it. And I really liked working there. And like I said, Jeffy Liu was my boss, and now he's the guy at Cloudera, and I'm interviewing over there for a DevRel position. So we'll see.
Hopefully, by the time this airs, you'll be
I'll have a job somewhere.
That good news. So from there, you went to OpenText as the senior product marketing manager, but you were still at Vertica. What changed with OpenText?
OpenText bought Vertica. So Vertica was kind of a little independent 200, 300 person company. And they were bought by HP, and then they were bought by Micro Focus. And then OpenText and Micro Focus was trying to sell them for to help, because Micro Focus was struggling a little bit after the whole Russian invasion of Ukraine. I mean, we were all set to have a user conference in Moscow when they did that, and we just had to stop doing business with all those guys, and it cut into our bottom line a lot, and not just Vertica, but the whole Micro Focus, because all of a sudden we couldn't, we were dealing with the Uber of Russia, the Netflix of Russia, all the kind of, things that we were working with them all over the world. And when they invaded the Ukraine, it's like we had a team in Russia and a team in Ukraine. And that was bad. So we had to figure out how to do it, and it really hurt the bottom line and kind of put them in a vulnerable position. And they had been trying to sell Vertica. We were so independent. It was wonderful. It was like all the advantages of a small company with all the advantages of a big company. I love that. And then OpenText came in, bought all of Micro Focus, not just Vertica, everything, and swallowed up all the tech. And I think they split off and sold the COBOL and Mainframe part of it. And they kept the Vertica part of it, IDLE, which was our computer vision, unstructured data kind of thing that cops were using and stuff like that. And started embedded Vertica in all their products and stuff. And I don't know that my job was that different from one company to the other. When I was working for Vertica, I was talking to the open source guys more. A lot of the conferences were open source. I went to a few meetups, and open source, like the Riot thing was a open source IoT thing in Raleigh. But it was pretty similar. I mean, I just kind of did a lot less of that and a lot more of the content writing and things like that. But I also went from working for something like a 250 person company to working for a 30,000 person company, which is such a different experience. I went from, my boss says, hey, we could use a white paper on this subject, or Marcom guys is like, we could use a white paper on this subject as bait for to send out to our email, something meaty and useful, and that people want to have. And you can work with any analyst you feel like working with. And I call up somebody like Tony Bear, or whoever, and say, hey, let's build a white paper together on X subject. And he'd be like, yeah, sure, let's do that. And a week or two later, I'd have a white paper. So the new company was like, well, we need a white paper. Okay, I'll write that. Oh no, we want you to put 4 or 5 bullets, less than 100 characters each, and then we will hand that to our writing team. And you also need to coordinate with the illustration team and this team, and you'll go through. It has to go through this process, and in 6 months we'll have that white paper done. And I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna update my resume. So yeah, I stuck it out for a while there, but I gotta say I really wasn't enjoying it. And one day, in fact, one day I blew up at my boss, which is not something I do a lot. Obviously, like you said, karma, don't burn bridges. But we had been working on one thing, my whole team, and then there was this other thing that we needed to get done. And it's like, when we finished this, we all switched gears and we're working on this. And she's like, you've had 6 weeks to work on this. And I'm like, we have had 3 days because we were working on that up until then. And she's like, well, I don't care. You still need to get this done before the deadline. And I'm like, we are working on it. Well, we're going to have meetings until you get it done every day. And I was like, and that was when I blew up. I was like, the last thing that we need is more freaking meetings. If you want us to get this done, kick us out of all the meetings, leave us alone and let us work. And that was, and about that time, Shane had called me up, and he was my boss. We worked together at Data Junction and Pervasive, and he was my boss at Actian in the big data division. And I really got along with him, like, famously. And he called me up that same day and said, hey, I've got this, I'm now the head of marketing over at this little startup called That Dot. You want to come? I was like, I've never heard of it. What do they do? And they were like, streaming graph. And I'm like, I think you just got me. Streaming graph. What a cool concept. So yeah, the tech was amazing. So that was my next thing. As I went to, so I had this like short stint at Actian, and then a short stint at That Dot doing streaming graph, and doing product marketing for streaming graph, and all the marketing for. I was the marketing department, because it was a little tiny startup, and then I was on a small team at GridGain shortly after that. So that's up till now. We actually, that took a long time to go through my, I have a long career.
You do. You have a good long career, and you have a lot of good stories. I think a lot of good learnings. But if there's, as people are watching this, I think there's one key, I guess, theme that you should take away from Paige's career is that understanding and importance of the community, the people that you work with. Like you obviously blew up at one boss, but overall, it's getting a call from somebody else. And,
Yeah.
and you and I were talking about this being data is and I would even expand that, even IT, even though IT is a pretty big thing, it's still a small world. It's still, as you were saying some of these names, I thought, oh, that name sounds familiar. I know that person. Or it's a very small world. And as you either do good or do bad,
you get a reputation.
You will get a reputation, and deservedly so, I think, in many cases. And so, yeah, definitely take that out. If you're job hopping, if you're screwing people over,
it's going to catch up to you.
It catches up to you.
Well, that's why I always say, it's like, even if you're not happy where you're at, just keep doing your job to the best of your ability and look for another one. Because there's just, I mean, I've never like rage quit a job or anything like that. It's like, and only twice have I actually even, blown up a little bit at my bosses. And that was a short one of like, no, we don't need friggin' more meetings to get work done. But I actually blew up on my boss at That Dot quite a bit, because I had created stuff in December that was still not published in March, April. And I was just like, this is ridiculous. It's like, this is done. It's like, this is done and this is done, and let's go on and do something else, and but ironically, they had already decided to lay me off. So at least I got some stuff off my chest before I got boot. And both times at That Dot and GridGain, it was the same situation. It was a very small company. They got a new CEO. Within a month, he fired at That Dot, because it was so small. He fired everybody who wasn't an engineer or who he hadn't hired. There was one guy that he hired that they kept, who wasn't an engineer. Everybody else out the door. And then at Grid Gain, they got a new CEO, and a month later they laid off about half the people in marketing sales. A little more than half, I think. And ironically, a couple of those folks at Delta Stream are the ones that called me up and were like, "Hey, come interview over here." So I'm interviewing over there. So we'll see that. So I got a few possibilities. It's just, interview process always takes a while. And I'm really enjoying the fact that I have nothing that I have to do every morning except go out and play in my garden. And I got to say, I'm getting really good at axe and knife throwing and archery. Those are my hobbies. And spear throwing. And so it's like thrown weapons is the thing. I'm now the champion of Bjornsburg, which is the San Antonio area in thrown weapons. And I came in third in my last competition. So it's like, I get to do a little fun stuff and relax a little. And I'm pretty okay with that, actually. I'm not minding that too much. So.
Should Joe be scared that you're learning how to throw weapons?
Joe is standing next to me, and he's a better archer than I am. He's not as good with throwing weapons, and I'm not as good at arching. But we both arch and we both throw weapons. We've got he's a maker, so he's made targets all in our back. I mean, we got 40 acres. We got plenty of space to build an archery range and throwing weapons targets. It's funny because the spears are one of the hardest things to have a target that you can throw straight into because it damages whatever you throw it at. And a lot of times you end up doing ground targets, like a hoop on the ground. It's like you get it in the hoop kind of thing. But our land is very rocky and it destroys spears if you do that. So I ended up, those giant round bales of hay that you feed your horses? I have one of those and it's mine now. It's been there for a year or so. So it's not really, it's not really good for feeding horses anymore, but because it's a big swirly thing and has a center, makes a great target. So I can throw spears at my hay bale, and I've gotten quite good with spears.
Isn't a hay bale what you shoot at anyway? Like the archers I've found, they all do that.
It has a backing, yes, but you usually have a target in front of it. And in this case, with spears, you can't throw it at an archery target. You can't throw it at an axe target because you'll destroy it and nothing flat. But throwing it in hay is actually really good for the spears. My husband's got mild steel tips on his, and it scrapes off the rust, cleans them very nicely. So that has nothing to do with data, but yeah, I have hobbies, and now I get to actually go out and trim my roses and throw my weapons and play, and I'm enjoying that. I'm thinking about going to an event, a big archery thrown weapons event in Oklahoma this weekend. And I went to one last weekend. It's like my husband was like, he went with me to the one last weekend, and he's just like, I don't want to go again. I'm like, okay, I'll go by myself.
Okay, so the required costume would be either Viking, let's see, Renaissance. What are you dressed as when you're doing this?
My persona is McEwen. Ewing was my maiden name, and that's what I write fiction under. And McEwen is the original version of that for Scots. So Scottish, but my husband is Norse, and Scots and Norse got married all the time. So I wear a lot of Norse outfits when it's warm, when it's cool. When it is warm like this, I wear Greek and Roman. I think everybody goes Greek and Roman in Texas in the summertime. But I also am now I'm like holding up my wrist. So in the SEA, in the Society for Creative Anachronisms, which is where I do all this, there is a concept of a student, and you have to get pretty good at something to become a student, and then there's a master. And so, like with the simulated heavy weapons, like sword and shield and stuff, it's a knight and a squire, so a white belt and a red belt. With the archery and thrown weapons, it's all lumped together as one big thing. Missile weapons, along with combat archery and siege and some other stuff. You get a bracer, and it's a white bracer if you're a master, and a red bracer if you are a student. Well, I became a student of a master not too long ago. It's kind of like a Yoda and a Padawan. So I'm a Padawan now. And my master, the guy that is my white bracer, my arc, is very into the thrown weapons. He's one of the ones that has spread it wide and stuff, and I have learned so much from him. It's been a lot of fun. And Joe's arc is more about combat archery and archery, target archery. And so he's kind of leaned in that direction. I'm kind of leaned in that direction, but we're both Archeriuses. We're both Padawans right now, and that's kind of fun. I forgot where I was going with that.
Nowhere. I was asking you about how you're dressed so that we can all picture.
Oh, right. Well, that was going to say is my arc is Roman. His persona is Roman. Romanius is Romanus. Actually, I said it wrong. Romanus is his SCA name. So he's Roman all year round. And when I'm, when it's hot, I'm Roman too, because lightweight linen is very nice, as opposed to multiple layers of wool, which is what Norse folks wore because it was cold there. And I learned how to do sling this past weekend. It's a tricky weapon, and I actually scored a point in a tournament. So I did it. I've kind of got it down, at least the beginner level. And I was doing it in a Roman tunic. And the thing is, the sling is one of the, the old Bible story about David and Goliath, and that was like pre-Roman, I think, and then Roman, and the sling has been a weapon forever. And the fact that I was out there wearing a Roman tunic using sling, the guy that was running the tourney remarked on that. It was like, that's so perfect. Oh, I am apologizing about the beeps. I think I forgot to turn a few things off that I should have. So sorry about that.
It's not coming on too much.
Okay.
So speaking of that, let's do some whiteboarding. All right, I think we're ready. So since you have such a background in both batch and streaming, let's start off by talking about some of those trade-offs of batch and streaming.
I'm not sure what I would write for that. But
just draw it out so that people have a good visualization of.
So like if you're doing a streaming pipeline, you almost always have, let me clear that for a second. So you almost always have data sources. And these days, a lot of them are like IoT that's streaming in, that's a massive amount and very fast. You're going to have transactions streaming in, possibly from a database, possibly not. Let me see. CDC actually might be a good way to. It's not let me undo it. See. So change state capture from that kind of thing. So if you've got changes in your database, or I did a book on Aerospike, which is a absolutely marvelous transactional database that does 20 million transactions per second on a 20 node cluster. So you get, depending, that's obviously a very large customer. You get a lot of different things coming in streaming, and as a general rule, you're going to put them in a pipeline of some sort. And so they're all going to stream into a pipeline, and it's probably distributed. And a lot of these pipelines are Kafka. They might be Kinesis, it might be Pulsar, it might be, something else, but a lot of them are Kafka. And the thing is, and then you want to do some kind of processing on it. So a lot of times you've got Flink or one of its competitors doing some kind of processing on the data. And it's doing its best to try and do some data transformation, like combining different things. And this is where the stationary data comes from. So you might have another database with historical data, or it might be, a cluster, or something like, it might be a storage format like S3 or Iceberg or HDFS, something along those lines. But it's got your historical data. So this is the data coming in now, and this is the data that has come in the past. And this gives you context on what's going on. So if you're trying to do real-time processing, what you're really trying to do is take the past and look at the patterns of the past and then identify as something streams in now what that is, what's going on. And a lot of these are gonna, especially Flink, it's gonna have a time window. And that might be a sliding time window. So as the data goes down, it'll look at different sections of it, but it's gonna tell you things like, this is the same as what we saw before, or this is different and it's really important. Anomalous, that kind of thing. That's a big in the IoT. So if I find something that, if I've got a sensor and it keeps telling me 25 degrees for 10 years, for 10 months, for 10 minutes, whatever, and then all of a sudden it tells me 27 degrees, 29 degrees, 32 degrees, something is bad. And I need to know that. And that's where the anomalous data is really important. It also comes in really important for things like cybersecurity, that sort of thing. The thing about all this data, it is usually unstructured. It's usually coming in JSON form, or some log form, or and then from the database, it's probably coming in something more like a row and column form, more like what you're used to. Like databases tend to store it a little more sensibly, or if it's in a data lake, it might be in more of a columnar form rather than a row form. So Parquet, something like that. And the trick is, in order to get anything useful out of this, you have to be able to figure all of that out, parse everything, put it all together, and then identify something important. Or at least send just the important stuff down to another place where you can do the analysis and learn something. And that is terrible. I don't think anybody can read that. There we go. That's slightly better. Do an analysis, and also, archive it, which, all the way back to where you started from. And this is cool. This is fine. So you're trying to combine the two, and you're trying to do something fast. And a lot of times you're going to have your machine learning or your AI model is trying to apply itself right there, right at the Flink level. And the thing is, Flink is pretty hard to use. And you need a Kafka cluster. You're going to probably want a Flink cluster. You're going to have a whole lot of stuff coming in from your IoT. That's going to come from like every component in every robot on an assembly line or something like that. Your transactions might be coming in really fast, or this might be changing really fast. And your past stuff is not changing as fast, or it might be because you're just feeding it right back in. But you're going to have a lot of it. This is where the big comes in for big data. So you've got a lot that you're trying to accomplish just to get your analysis at the end. And this may be BI, but usually what it is some kind of, these days, and especially some kind of AI agent, or something that triggers a real-time monitoring, so that a person can see, hey, look, there's a problem here. Alerting, it might tell you, hey, there's a problem, go check it out. Or it might even be a recommendation of something's up. You should do a thing. So like Philips was one of my customers at some point, and they had phone home capabilities in all of their MRI machines, CAT scanners, all of those medical devices that they would sell to various hospitals. And that IoT would come in and it would tell them this, they'd look at the past patterns and they'd be like, this particular part tends to break when you get above this temperature and it's at least 3 years old. And, judging by the current stuff coming in, they can go, oh, it's above this temperature and it's at least 3 years old. This thing is going to break. And your MRI machine is going to be down and people need that. So they would call the hospital and say, hey, nobody's using your MRI machine at 3 a.m. tomorrow, right? No, yeah, it's pretty dead about then. And send the repair guy with all the parts that they knew were going to break in the next year. And he'd go in there and just replace them all and walk away, and your MRI machine would not break. And it would continue to so zero downtime was what they were going for. So that's a good example of a need for I need to know at least within a few days. I need to know as quickly as possible. And at the same time, it's a good example of real time has a lot of meetings. I've done a couple of things on, what the heck does real time really mean? And it just depends on who you're talking to. So if you're doing streaming as opposed to batch, a lot of times people think of that as real time, and it is, because you're going to get the information you need within, I don't know, seconds, milliseconds, microseconds, depending on the technology and how it's built. But you may not take an action until next Tuesday. Or you may have an automation in there that takes an action within 20 milliseconds. That large customer I was talking about earlier that did 20 million transactions per second, they were an ad tech guys, the trade desk, and they were my customer at Vertica and also a big customer of Aerospike. So when I wrote the book for Aerospike, one of the co-writers was actually a data architect for the trade desk. So we, got a lot of information on their architecture and what they're doing, and they're pushing the limits. They're doing some amazing stuff. And the thing is, for ad tech, I have to, within 20 milliseconds, I have to put up a web page, figure out what's on the web page, where my ad targeting space is on that web page, put it out for bid, get bids, decide which bid is the one I want to go with, show the ad, and then know if the person clicked on it or not. And know who that person is as much as possible by their IP address or their browser history or whatever it is. So that all of that has to happen in 20 milliseconds. And if it doesn't happen within, I think it's 200, 200 milliseconds is their entire thing for all the things that have to happen. But for the Aerospike part of it, it was 20 milliseconds. And the reason is, if I'm clicking on a website and it takes more than half a second for something to pop up, chances are I've already gone to another website. And that ad will never appear. So it has to be super, super fast. If it's not in real time, they can't make money. No one can make money. Not the advertisers, not the broker, not the web page, nobody. So if it is not within milliseconds, the business objective is failed. That, I think, is the key. I think you did a really wonderful presentation at Data Day where I had a shaky cam to try and thing. And one of the things you did was get somebody up and say, oh, I want real time. It's really cool. Everybody's doing real time. Let's do real time. And you were like, well, what happens if you don't get the answer within 10 seconds? Nothing. Well, how about we do a 10-second SLA instead of a 10 millisecond SLA? Well, is that still real time? Well, the BI guys who are clicking a drill down and are generally okay if it comes back in 10 seconds. So aren't they, right? Is that accurate? And the business person's like, yeah, it is actually. And then you're like, well, let's not do real time, because the trade-off is that this is freaking complicated. This is not a simple thing to do. It requires expertise in Kafka, Flink, IoT, AI, analytics, probably some sort of automation, You're going to have a data science team to train their models on your historical stuff, and then some way to get your models into production so that they can check the current real-time stuff and give you a reaction really quickly. That requires really fast hardware. I mean, one of the big things that the aerospace guys were trying to do was use NVMe. I mean, they'd already gone to SSDs because they were faster than spinning disk by orders of magnitude, but they were like, that's still not fast enough. NVMe's are even faster, and I think Intel is not making them anymore. So the aerospace guys are like, we need that speed. It's just that a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't need that speed, and if you don't need the speed, you don't need all of the expertise. You don't need all of that crazy amount of work it takes to make it happen. And that's kind of the trade-off. It's like if you can function with, I get my BI stuff, my dashboard gets refreshed every hour. I mean, I for a BI dashboard, that's phenomenal. That's great. For a sensor on an assembly line where they're creating chip wafers, and one wrong move from the one robot will ruin a $30 million or $2 or $3 million wafer. That's terrible. Once an hour would ruin like 100 wafers. So you have to know what your business requirement is in order to know what you have to do, and then you can figure out what is what is it going to cost me? What do I got to do to make that happen? I think one of the guys that I'm talking to is Delta Stream, and what they do is they have, I think, Kafka, Flink, and ClickHouse as their database. So it's like,
would you mind drawing that up? So go to dashboard or whiteboard 2. Just press over on the right, and it would be on 2.
Go on 2.
Yep.
Okay. Well, essentially, I was just going to say that they do like the Kafka, Flink, and a database part. They have it all together with a really nice, easy interface. So you don't have to be an expert in Kafka, an expert in Flink, an expert in ClickHouse in order to build your data pipelines. So.
I see. So not as whiteboardable.
No, not really. I mean, I've already whiteboarded what it's doing under the covers. On the front end, it's basically doing that without having an army of brilliant text to make it work.
Okay. Well, you made the best typo / I don't know what you call it, drawing issue ever on the show.
It's a big mess. What did I do?
I'm trying to, for some reason, try refreshing the page. The laser pointer isn't working for me.
Okay.
It's an issue on my end. Let me just refresh.
Yeah.
All right, let's try this. Here we
Good
go. Best typo
analysis.
/ that's not what it says. That's
anal
what you
asis.
said.
Yeah, I almost put A and AL as an abbreviation, and I went, no, let's not do that.
Well, that's where my mind is.
Like, that's a bad idea.
So let's go to the whiteboard 2.
Okay.
And
right.
Let's see, we've got, we were going to talk about the Lakehouse and
the advantages of it and why it exists. So back in the day, before a lake house was a thing, which I still think that sounds like a place you go fishing, not a place where you get work done.
Well, that's Ben Morika's fault for calling it a lake house.
I know, but I used to call it unified analytics, and it wasn't just me. There were several other, like Gartner and EMA and some of the other analyst firms that did that. And I wrote a book called, Accelerate Machine Learning with a Unified Analytics Architecture. Because the Lakehouse is a brilliant idea if you do machine learning, if you do any kind of AI. Nowadays, of course, RAG is the big thing, because when they say AI, they really just mean language generated AI. Or occasionally they mean art or video generation, LVMs, that kind of thing. But mostly it's LLMs that they're talking about when they talk about AI. But I've been talking about AI for a long time, and it's always been machine learning based AI. It's like the ability for it to do something, make a decision, make a recommendation, etc., based on machine learning. So I still, I get frustrated when people are like AI. I'm like, what do you mean by AI? It's becoming like real time. It's like, so what do you mean by real time? So I got to tell you a story. When I was at SyncSort, the head of engineering was a brilliant lady named Fernanda, who asked that question. So she had a customer come in and say, I really need to use SyncSort to do ETL in real time. And she's like, oh, real time. Yeah. I mean, we're a distributed system, and we can get stuff done usually in milliseconds and in subsecond and stuff, but real time, wow, that's tough. She didn't say any of that out loud. What she said was, so when you say you need it in real time, what's your SLA? How fast do you actually need it? And the customer was like, yeah, I really need my ETL to work and to feed my dashboards every hour in real time. And Fernanda was like, yeah, I think we can do that for you. You got to ask, because you never know what people mean. So now if somebody says AI, I have to stop them and say, okay, what do you mean when you say AI? Because do you mean artificial general intelligence? Do you mean chat GPT? Do you mean a regression algorithm? It's like, this is a very different thing, and yet we're using the same term for all three. So yeah, pet peeve. Sorry. Go ahead.
Well, go ahead. Let's see. Go ahead and draw it out. So let's see this.
What was the question? Let's
talk about the Lakehouse and the
Lakehouse.
Iceberg.
Lakehouse. Now, so the Lakehouse is a really cool concept. So back in the day, we'd have all these data sources coming in, and some of them would be streaming, like we saw, and some of them would be systems of record from, like your transactional databases, things like that. Some of them would be third-party data would come in, maybe in like JSON form or something. Oh, that's a very bad piece of paper kind of idea. But third-party data, who knows what the heck format it would come in. And you would have to basically do some ETL of some sort, with some kind of tool usually, or God forbid you would write the pipelines yourself, but that's, you could if you really wanted to. And then you'd pull it into like a data warehouse or something along those lines and do some analytics on it. And then that would feed your dashboards, your other applications, like, it's going to do something with that data, etc. Now, this is great. The trouble is, one, the ETL layer was very slow. It sometimes put as much as a day of delay into your whole process, and that meant, your apps, all of this stuff was slow, and it could be an hour slow, it could be 10 minutes slow, but it's still going to be slow. And usually it was a day slow, because in order to do the ETL, you have to pull all this data from these other places, and like the systems of record were busy doing transactions and stuff. You couldn't throw a query at it and say, send me 1,000 lines of data right now, because it's busy running your business, and you kind of needed to keep doing that. And so ETL ended up being done at like 3 o'clock in the morning, when these databases weren't busy. And also then, what we did over time is we moved the ETL into the database, into the data warehouse. And we were like, okay, let's do it here. And we're gonna just throw all of it in there. And what that was not so much the data warehouse as it was a data lake. A lot of times you had your data lake right there. And you would just throw everything into your data lake in a big mess, big jumbly pile. And then you would do some ELT on it, and you would turn it into something semi-useful. There's a thing called like a metal architecture, and this is like bronze, because it's just all your data, but it's crap. It's just a big dumping ground. And then you do some ELT, you find your duplicates, you combine things that make sense together, you do all of that, and you stick it in there, and now you have a silver layer, and it is useful. And you can feed some of your apps and stuff like that with the silver layer, but you're still going to have, I don't know, 3 different versions of customer from your accounting, your sales, and your shipping departments. And 2 of them have different phone numbers, and 2 of them have different addresses. And you're going to have to do some data quality, some master data management, some, really sophisticated stuff. And that's how you ended up coming over here, and you get your gold layer. And I'm doing this in columns because you're almost always in Parquet if you're in a these days. Anyway, you're almost always in Parquet. I mean, it could be Parquet or Orc or a database or whatever. But nowadays, Parquet is kind of the big thing. Well, this is great. And your processing engine was usually Spark. Back in the day, it was MapReduce, but MapReduce was almost like doomed from day one because it just wasn't a good paradigm for a lot of different data processing, especially machine learning and AI. And so you had to, these guys, so if you had a data science guy, he had to pull stuff out, a little sample, because this was too much. And he'd train his machine learning algorithm on that. And then he'd try to turn around and apply it up there. And you'd have a whole nother team of data engineers who were trying to figure out how to take this little sample thing that he did, 20 steps of ELT, ETL, whatever you want to call it, 20 steps of data transformation, data munging. That was the other thing we called it. Same idea. Clean up your data so that you can then apply your model and do something useful. So that's kind of like the Wayback Machine. Now I'm gonna clear it.
Just go to 3.
Do it again. All right.
Yeah.
So that actually was not the Lakehouse. That was more like a data lake. I think that's more like a data lake. I sort of did a data warehouse earlier and then turned it into a data lake as we were going on. So the Lakehouse idea was, let's combine those 2. So let's have this data warehouse up here. It might be distributed. It might be a cluster. But in the end, it's one very clean section of data. So we've already done the bronze, silver. This is the gold. And what we are doing is we're taking all of our data sources that we had. Maybe I can do it a little better. Okay, and we're putting them into a cluster, and that's our data lake. And this might be Hadoop, it might be S3, it might be, who knows. But it's usually, these days, it's usually in Parquet sometimes, but we do the ETL, the ELT down here, and then we push that gold, beautiful, awesome data up here because and it does queries down into there to get historical data. And you can do the real-time can flow straight into here and get a response and come straight out of here. And this is where you apply your machine learning, is going to also be either in the database or right in that stream. And that's going to power your applications, your dashboards, whatever you got. Now, that was supposed to be machine learning. It's kind of, okay. This is great, except there is S3, and only Amazon likes S3, and until people started, MinIO now can do software S3 on any hardware. There's specialized hardware like VAST and Dell and EMC and a bunch of other stuff that does S3 compatible on-prem, And, you know, Google has their own format, and Azure has a different format. And so, you know, and there was HDFS, and there's, you know, Hive. And so this was problematic. The data lake part of it could be friggin' anything. And that was a big problem. So Iceberg came along, and what it did was it standardized us. So now it is a very standard format, usually Parquet, but not always. And it has a metadata layer that it has put over that Parquet. And now when this queries it, you get a faster response, which is good. Also, you can have other things query it. So let's say this is my data science area. I can query it too. And I can get a response. And I can have this for my little data science workshop. And I can train my models on that. And that makes it easier to get into production. Or I can have, let's say I am a big company and I acquired somebody who uses Trino, and somebody who uses Snowflake, and somebody who uses Vertica, and somebody who uses, so this can be, again, same kind of idea. It's problematic because every single vendor has their own thing. It could be Redshift. It could be, God, who knows? And the problem is that the lake was always different, and the warehouse was always different, and these were just not very compatible. It took a lot of work to get the up and down, the query and response to work. Well, now, because this Iceberg come along and made everything kind of standard, I can query it with Trino. I can query it with Snowflake, SF. I can query it with Presto. I can query it with something you've never heard of yet, Pinot. It doesn't matter, because Iceberg is a consistent format. Now, Databricks fought this a little bit. They have Hootie, which is a pretty nice Lakehouse format also. And I've seen a couple of people run with that. And there's three formats: Iceberg, Hootie, and I forgot what the other one is. But there's multiples. But because Iceberg wasn't tied to a particular vendor, sorry about that. It's spring in Texas, and I'm talking a lot. So because this wasn't tied to a particular vendor, there's a whole lot of different vendors that have contributed to the Iceberg open source. And that means lots of different query engines support it. And that makes it absolutely beautiful as a standard. Because up until now, there was no standard. It was like the Wild West. Everybody was kind of doing their own thing. Now, what you have is, well, including Iceberg and Parquet, is a Lakehouse. That's the capability of, it combines the brilliance of a data warehouse with the long-term archive of a data lake and the standardization of Iceberg. So you put all three of those together, and what you get is something that can use multiple query engines. It can give you fast answers. It can be distributed or smaller, so it gives you a lot of different options as far as, you know, how much data do I have is one of my things, IoT, which means I have a ton. So it's scalable. It can be fast. It has a lot of capabilities. Now I'm gonna say some things that you're gonna like argue with me about probably. Distributed systems. And also virtual systems that use like Kubernetes, you know, containerized systems. They both have about a 10% hit in performance because of network latency. It takes a little while for these guys to talk to each other. Or in this case of containerized, it takes a while to get it into the container and to get the containers to talk to each other. Same idea. So this is not the fastest way to do it, but it is the best way for most people to get instant real-time from their actual streaming data and still train things long-term. And it's powerful. And it gets your, it really gets your data science and your machine learning into production a lot faster. There used to be, there was a whole set of tech that you used to train models and a whole set of tech that you used to put them into production. And basically your data scientists would do this and they figure their job is done. Here, have the model, boom. And then data engineers would be like, this model, oh my God, I've got to figure out how to make it do this and this and this and fit into that. And 6 months later, it might be into production. And by then it's obsolete. So the accuracy has gone down because your data is drifted. And this helps a lot with that problem. So
you're actually right. You're actually wrong, I should say. I don't disagree with you on that speed. In fact, I've talked about it a few times on this show. I do expect a counter revolution to the microservices, where we've had the microservices revolution where we've taken a bunch of the non-distributed systems people and have them create distributed systems, which are highly inefficient. And so I think what we'll have is this realization of, oh, wow, we could actually do this much faster and
on a single system.
On it with a tenth of the processing power on a single system, and it would be this, oh wow, this mind thing. But the basic problem is people who don't know what they're doing don't know when to do something. So we have an overgeneralization.
I think a big problem is people think if it's cool, I must do it. We had that problem with the cloud. It's like everybody's like, oh, we must all go to the cloud because everybody should go to the cloud. It's cool. And then we had a whole lot of people who went up there and found out, oh, now my budget is exponentially bigger and unpredictable and all these other things. It's like, why don't I just take all these workloads that are not spiky and put them on a co-location center? And then I don't have to pay through the nose unless I actually need cloud capabilities. You know, it's the same kind of thing. It's like, don't ever do anything because it's cool. You got to do it because, unless you're like me and you just want to learn new tech. And I think that's part of the problem is engineers like to learn new tech. And so, you know, if the choice is, let me build you something simple that was from tech 15 years old that works, and that'll accomplish what you want to do, or I can use this cutting edge new thing that everybody's talking about. As an engineer, I'm going to pick the second one. As a data architect person who is in charge of the business, I'm going to say, let's use the simplest, cheapest thing that will get me what I need. And I think Data Lakehouse is accomplishing a lot of that. It's helping a lot of that. But I'm going to steal one more because I know we're almost out of time, but there's one more thing. Because back when Hadoop was invented, to your point, a single box was maybe 2 cores. And trying to get something that scaled to handle even just the Twitter fire hose or, you know, social media, much less trying to handle the craziness from IoT, which is like mountains bigger. It meant you had to have a cluster. You had to have more machines. Nowadays, you can go on Amazon and get an instance that has 48 cores and like 96 virtual cores. And that's one instance on Amazon. And they make computers now with 192 cores. So if I could take a 2-core machine and I had to have, you know, an 8 machine cluster to get my job done, well, 2 times 8 is only 16. I mean, if I have a 48 core instance, I can get that all done on one machine. I don't need that distributed system anymore. And I think the progression in hardware has made us the pendulum swing the other direction. It's like we went from it has to be a single machine to it should be distributed to it's going back to like do it on one machine. Things like the spinning disk. So disk versus SSD. That's a big difference. Versus NVMe. That is also a big difference, although this may not matter if they stop making it. And now RAM also used to be super expensive. Now not so much. So the cost of it is going down. So what that means is I can have a single system with 192 cores that works just as well as a 192 machine cluster, or half of that, whatever that is, with a fairly significant amount of RAM. I could do a lot of my work in memory, and then just store maybe my archive stuff, and have that entire data lakehouse capability on a single machine. And I think that is where we're going. And I think in memory, ETL or ELT or whatever you want to call it, we're calling it a data integration hub these days. But we're doing it all in memory. And I think that's where we're headed.
I would agree with you. So let me ask you one last question. Why moonlight writing books?
Why do I write books? I love to write. I think I wrote my first story when I was 6. As soon as I learned enough to write sentences and make them go together, I made up a story. I love to write. It's like those are my two big geeky things. Is I really hyper focus on tech, on data architecture, on data management, and on writing. And I'm ADHD as heck, which anybody who just saw me talk for 2 hours would know. So it's very hard for me to focus on one thing a lot of times. And if I can do more than one thing at the same time, it makes me happy. But when I was a kid, they didn't, nobody got an ADHD diagnosis unless they were bouncing off the walls and they were a boy. So, I got kept in at recess trying to finish my homework because I kept looking out the window and making up stories. That ability to make up stories has been in my brain. I think I got asked in an author interview, ironically, it's like, do you think you were born an author? And I was like, I was born a maker-upper of stories. And then I learned how to be an author. Because that's just taking that natural thing that I do anyway and turning it into something that other people can enjoy. But the tech writing thing has also been there all along. I mean, as soon as I switched over to tech, my first thought was I'd really like to make a living as a writer, and tech writers can do that. So last year and this year, I mean, the last 2 years, I wrote Aerospike Up and Running. Co-wrote, obviously, and not by myself, for O'Reilly, which is a big, wonderful technical book, and I wrote 3 fiction books. So Precise Oaths and Explosive Chemistry and Obsidian Prince, the Lillian and the Faye of Fayetteville series, because one is my bread and butter and the other is my joy.
Well, Paige, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, and best of luck as you choose your next adventure.
Thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed it.